And so what Teams does is it does the recording and the transcription at the same time, but we don't want the transcription. Stop transcription.
Got a photographic memory. Remember every click there,
Right.
Justin.
All right. Good morning, Chair Postman, Member Garrett, staff, and guests. The lobby is open and the recording has begun.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll convene the executive management team meeting for Wednesday, September 14th. Our first item here is a update on the Cannabis Central Reporting System, CCRS, and we'll turn it over to our CFO, Jim Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Postman. I am pleased to report continued good progress on the CCRS project. We've recently, in the past week, completed phase one. As you may remember, phase one was focused on, initially focused on bug fixes and making the system work better, but those were behind the scenes, really only visible to our staff and our IT folks. The primary component of phase one, though, that we just completed is the completion of all of the reports. We had broken the reports down into three categories, phase 1, 2, and 3, in order of importance. We focused on phase 1 first, as those were the reports that our primary users and enforcement had identified as the most important to them. Those were completed quite a few months ago. Phase 2, next level of importance, and the final group, phase 3 reports, were released into production earlier this week. So that completes that phase. Parallel to that, we have been working on the manifest, the external facing part of the system that outside users will be able to take advantage of. The development of the manifest, the new manifest solution, is completed, and work has been ongoing to test and to fix the bugs that were found through that testing process. I believe 19 issues were recorded and 18 of them have been resolved. Our next step is to engage with integrators that provide services to licensees. The integrators will be the ones developing the interfaces for their customers to the manifest process. So we have reached out to them, and we'll be working with them to expand our testing to outside users. And then when that testing is complete, it will be opened up to the greater licensee public. And we're projecting the new solution to be going live before the end of the year. So that's very good progress. I do want to acknowledge Chandra and her team. She shared today with us a great training video that explains what's going on in the system, how it's used, what we're collecting, and also how to use the reports. So that will be really helpful for our users of the system, primarily enforcement folks, some licensing, some finance, but it already seems to be shaping up that this system that we built specifically for us is already much more usable and being used by our staff. So that's why we did this, and that result is coming to fruition. The other piece to the rollout is we're working very closely. The project team is working closely with our communications folks to develop the overall communications plan. This will represent a change in how licensees use the manifest process and the system they're going to engage with. So we'll make sure that we connect with them in every kind of manner that we can. Similar to when we went live, we we put information out there in just about every format that we could think of. One other change to the project and the project team, when we stood up this as a second phase project after we went live, we didn't have internal resources that were capable of managing the project. And so we turned to outside contractors for that service. And in the last several weeks, we have determined that we've hired new staff in IT that have significant project management expertise. So we've brought that function back in-house with it, and being managed by the new project manager is Jackie Scalaro, a considerable amount of project management experience, and by staffing that with internal staff, we'll probably save it. We could probably cut our cost in half for project management. So considerable savings, but no impact to the project. We'll be keeping the same pace and moving forward. So that's where we stand right now. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Jim. I did get a really good walk through the whole system with Captain Wissing, and it's pretty interesting. I should have done that a long time ago. I would have had a better picture in my head of what people were looking at and how they used this internally, particularly. But he did mention that we've at least got sort of connection to 100% of licensees into the system. And you know, there's a time I wasn't 100% convinced we'd get everybody, so that was good. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the board meeting this morning. We had one public comment about CCRS, but okay, if you didn't, I won't. Yeah, we'll send it. It was just some questions from David Busby, or comments from David Busby, and I was going to give you a chance to respond, but not necessary. What is there a way, like what are you hearing from licensees? Are we getting calls? Are we complaints?
I'm actually not hearing anything from licensees. The only active communications we've had recently have been with a couple of tribes. One specifically is looking to kind of tailor the information they report. Our whole package of reporting in CCRS is more than what they're required to share with us according to their compact. Our compact calls out for them to report transactions between tribal enterprises and licensees, and our system is designed to capture quite a bit more information about particular operation than they're necessarily required to report. So they are working through some of those issues to try to create an interface that will not error out of our system and will allow us to collect what we what they're required to submit without submitting more than they have to. So our IT folks are engaged in that discussion, and we'll be working with them to help them through that process.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Ollie, any questions on CCRS? No, okay, thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
We will move to a human resources update. I know I saw Anita Bingham, our director of HR.
Thank you.
There you are. Hello.
Are you able to pull up the PowerPoint, Justin?
It's coming up right now.
All righty, thank you. All right, so good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. As you know, we're continuing to operate in a competitive job market, competing against other state agencies for, especially in the enforcement arena. So I'd like to share some information about what we've been trying to do to attract diverse and qualified candidates to come to work for us. So you can see from January to present, we had 55 employees that left the agency. This slide shows the codes as reflected in HRMS. for the reason they left or the type of appointment they took with another agency. So for example, where it says exempt and WMS, that means the employee left to take either an exempt or WMS position with another agency. I know that's a little confusing there. All right, next slide, please. Another thing to keep in mind for the upcoming vacancies and succession planning is the age of our workforce. We have 8 employees who are eligible to retire with full benefits right now. 6 of those are in enforcement, 1 in licensing, and 1 in the director's office. In all plans, we have 35 employees across the agency that are eligible to retire with a reduced benefit. The employees' reduced benefit would be dependent upon their age and years of service. And of those, we have 5 employees who can retire with a reduced benefit now, and they'll be able to retire with a full benefit next year. So moving into that next category. We have 22 enforcement officers who are already retired from another enforcement plan. So these employees could leave state service at any time, just to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So our recruitment efforts are going strong with approximately 45 positions to fill. The enforcement officer positions continue to be hard to keep filled due to the lengthy hiring process. Most of you remember when the LCB did the entire screening process, and that included the physical ability testing. But a little over a year ago, we contracted with the public safety testing, which has been going very well for us. Using PST takes the subjectivity out of the process for us. And with that, though, the PST works for multiple states, and it can take the investigator more than 5 weeks to complete the report and get it back to us. Some of that time frame depends on how responsive the applicant is when PST reaches out to them for additional information. Once they successfully pass that stage, a conditional job offer is made, and then the applicant moves on to the polygraph, the psychological and medical screening to determine if they can be hired. So it is kind of a lengthy process for those folks. Vipin reports, though, that all other recruitments are going well in terms of us getting qualified applicants and people eventually accepting positions with us. Although I would say it's fairly common now that people are coming in above step A. Next slide. We do have a few other vacancies that are not currently out for recruitment, but that might be in the works. All these numbers tend to change kind of day by day. So that's what we're at right now with other vacancies.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that one, Anita? So you mean these could be any minute? This just means there's a vacancy, but we haven't finished the announcement. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that we won't be recruiting for them, but right now we're just not posted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So we're excited to have a fully staffed recruitment team again. Vipin, Tony, and Amy are working hard on outreach efforts. They're now consistently using LinkedIn, Monster, and other diversity listservs. Most recently, Handshake has been helping with positions that require a degree or college credits, such as our positions in finance. So that's been great that we started using those. Next slide. So some of our ongoing efforts are listed here. Enforcement has done really well with some recent in-person job fairs, and we expect to see more opportunities to do those job fairs in person in the future. We're continuing with our employee referral incentive for those positions that are hard to fill, and we've had 6 be successful so far, so that's a good thing. And then Vipin has been directly reaching out to profiles in LinkedIn for hard to fill positions in IT and finance. And as part of the application process, we ask applicants where they heard about our jobs, and we're seeing some good results from that outreach. So for him, it's just kind of balancing his efforts with the outcomes, that he gets from the time that he spends. So he's feeling pretty good about how that's going. Any questions or suggestions about any of that?
Can you tell us a little more about the internship program that was mentioned in that previous slide?
Sure. So the pair team has been meeting and talking about how we can bring diversity into the agency. And one of the ideas that we came up with, and we'd actually started on this prior to COVID when Clarice was here, to try to reach out to colleges and get an internship program going with them, because we know that colleges, especially over in Eastern Washington, sometimes don't have access to jobs that those people in the local areas have. So we have done some initial outreach with U of W, and they do have a criminal justice program. So we're thinking that might be a good place to start, potentially with that college. But we've had one meeting with them, and I think we're going to meet with the contact person for the criminal justice program.
Is the internship just in the enforcement realm?
Eventually, we would like to open it up for all positions, but we were thinking that might be a good place to start.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Polly?
Sorry. So are you finding doing recruitment, are more folks attracted to being virtual, hybrid, coming in person, or what that's like while we're doing the recruitment process of the openings?
Are you talking about the job fairs, Ollie?
I thought I had raised my hand back when you were showing the open positions and things,
Oh, okay.
but yeah,
Just in general, though.
right,
Like,
in general.
or is it helping that we're allowing people to be remote in some cases? And
Yeah, I definitely think it is. I think, a lot of people are looking for at least the hybrid, workplace now. And so the fact that a lot of our jobs can, accommodate that is a good thing. Obviously, the enforcement people have always, worked from home and the office and out in the field. So that should be, and their schedules are fairly open. So that's, an attractive thing to be able to offer to them. But yeah, I think the hybrid is working well, and it is very much in demand from people these days.
So do we have a feel, and you probably wouldn't know at this moment, but during that process, do we have a number, a count on people now that's employed with us that's in Seattle, in Eastern Washington, in other areas that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be employed if we weren't hybrid or virtual?
Yeah, I
With
don't know
us.
that off the top of my head, but I do know that people tend to, you know, definitely be looking for that as they're considering jobs. So I think for those agencies that have come back to the office, which I'm not really sure which ones have required people to come back 100% of the time, but it's definitely a recruitment incentive that we can play to.
Great.
All right.
Okay, great, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with those.
Thank you.
We'll have a legislative update from Chris Thompson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members Garrett and Vollendroff. Pleasure to be with you again for a quick update. Most of what's going on right now on the legislative front is agency request legislation. So today, actually, is our self-imposed deadline for submitting those agency request packages to the governor's office and OFM through the new portal called BEARS. In the past, it's been bats, but now it's bears. And so far, I haven't encountered any glitches with the new animal we're using as a portal. I submitted our agency request bill on subpoena authority for cannabis in the last week. And I'm working today on completing documents for our other two potential agency request bills. So that's been the primary focus. I'll share a little bit about substantively on those. First of all, on the subpoena bill, I may have mentioned this once in an earlier meeting, but We did conduct, and thank you, Lisa, for reaching out to WASPIC on our subpoena authority bill. We did finally get confirmation from WASPIC that they support this effort. So that's a really important stakeholder for that particular topic. We were really glad to see that. Next, I'll mention the THC Regulation Bill. We have made some revisions, basically 2 revisions from the initial draft that was circulated with stakeholders. One is a technical fix, if you will, suggested by the State Patrol to the definition of cannabis. I won't get into that minutia with you. There is another comma figures in that discussion, by the way, just
Oh, good.
just for entertainment value.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. The other change we've made in the draft is to revert back to current law on the definition of hemp. The Department of Agriculture and numerous stakeholders suggested that we not change the definition of hemp. So we've accepted that suggestion. We've made that revision. Just yesterday, we got back from the code revisor those revised bill language changes. Already this morning, got back from our staff. Kudos to Colin O'Neill and the whole fiscal note team. We've already got fiscal notes on these. So the THC regulation bill looks like it's carrying a fiscal note of about a little more than $400,000 for the next biennium, 23-25. Primarily, that's for enforcement staff to do education with licensees. So really thrilled with the great staff work in turning that around quickly. What I need to do to finish our package and be prepared to submit it is finish a statement of need document around the bill, a summary of provisions, and then the stakeholder feedback. All of that needs to be put together and submitted. So that's underway, and I'll get back to that as soon as I'm done here. Finally, not least importantly, of course, the social equity legislation. So we made some changes there as well that I want to make sure you're aware of. A couple of in a couple of important areas, we've revised the draft based in part on stakeholder feedback as well as internal conversation. So part of the goal of our legislation is to bring some portability to the already authorized social equity licenses, which by about a 2/3 to 1/3 ratio are currently stuck in a jurisdiction locally that won't allow operation of that type of business in those cities or counties. So portability was important to making those existing licenses actually usable. But what this bill draft says is that those social equity applicants who are successful in obtaining a license would have only a one-time opportunity to locate in a jurisdiction that will allow them to operate. And only at the point of initial licensure would there be that opportunity for these applicants. And once licensed at a particular location, then there wouldn't be any further opportunity for portability or mobility outside of that jurisdiction. Now, they could move within whatever city or county they're located in and licensed for, but not to a different county or a different city. So that's one important change. The other one came out of, you might know, a series of conversations around social equity plans and other cannabis licensees, not social equity applicants or social equity licensees. So our initial draft circulated with stakeholders envisioned requiring all cannabis licensees to submit a social equity plan in order to renew their license after the beginning of 2024. There was some concern about that, some pushback around that from the stakeholder community. We had a lot of discussions internally about how to approach this, realizing the importance of broadening awareness and focus on social equity across the community, but without imposing an undue burden or being excessively bureaucratic, if you will, permit that phrase around this. So actually, it was board member Vollendorf who sort of formulated the idea, out loud in the moment as we were meeting with him, to provide an incentive, not a mandate. So this draft says that social cannabis licensees who are not social equity licensees are encouraged but not required to submit a social equity plan. And the incentive is that if they do, upon the determination by the agency that they have submitted a social equity plan, then they would get a one-time waiver, or technically it would be a reimbursement of their license renewal fee. So we don't need to go into all the details of how the actual process administratively works, but it would be a one-time waiver of a license fee that amounts to $1,381, I believe. So it's not an insignificant license fee that we hope will provide a meaningful incentive to gain buy-in across the regulated cannabis industry, our licensees, to participate, to think through this, to share thoughts, and to kind of further the whole agenda around social equity. So that also was something that we've changed in the current draft. Now the fiscal note on this bill comes in at a little more than $5 million for the next biennium. That is for staff in our agency, in finance and in licensing and in enforcement. It's also for covering anticipated billing costs from the Attorney General's office, primarily assumed to come from appeals from people who applied but didn't obtain a license. I would hasten to point out, while that sounds like a large cost figure impact in the fiscal note, it doesn't take into account the most likely more than offsetting revenue impacts of awarding these licenses, opening these businesses, conducting additional sales of product, and the state collecting additional excise and sales tax revenue from expanded cannabis sales. We can't project the size of that impact, so it's indeterminate, the revenue collections, but we anticipate, fairly clearly what the costs will be and the loss of revenue from the license renewal fees that would be waived one time, as I described. But we're pretty confident that the amount of revenue that would come in because of this legislation would way more than offset those costs. So that's where we are on that. And again, as I said, I'm scrambling to get documents pulled together and ready to submit. Today was our self-imposed deadline. The actual firm final deadline from the governor's office is Friday. So we wanted to have a little bit of leeway in there. We are also, and I believe there is a different deadline for this, because we've got fiscal notes on two of these bills. Our finance staff is cranking on getting together decision packages to cover those two items. And I think there's a deadline next week on that, but Jim Morgan and his folks could tell you more if you have questions on that. So that's the main excitement going on in the legislative world. Right now, there aren't any legislative committee meetings on the horizon. There aren't other activities. Legislators are out, most of them on the campaign trail. It's election season. And so there isn't a lot going on at the Capitol in the legislative arena right now. That's not to say we aren't plenty busy with these other activities in the meantime. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chris. Ollie?
Do we start any type of process before session of meeting with the legislators and talking about our agency request bill?
Yes, Board Member Garrett, good question. We don't know exactly when. The answer is yes, but exactly when will depend on when we get an approval, presuming it is approval, from the governor's office. So we have to get the okay from the governor's office first before we can approach legislators and say, here's a bill that we're requesting. We want you to know about it. We want to know if you'd consider sponsoring it. Those types of conversations will need to happen, but can't until and should shortly after we get that green light from the governor's office. We don't have a deadline for that. They'll use the time they need to go through their process, their analysis, their due diligence, their stakeholder engagement, their internal reviews, fiscally and policy wise. And that how long that takes varies a lot depending on what the bill is and the topic.
Right. So when that process began, and we're just speaking into being, once we get the approval and okay from the governor's office, the board will be included in the meetings and things with you all or whoever to get those conversations going with the legislators.
Yes, of course, we'll have to coordinate with, making sure it's only one of you at a time. But yeah, we're definitely envisioning involving board members to assist with that process in reaching out to connecting with the legislature and laying the groundwork prior to January.
And in the mobility part of it and what we're putting in for what we're putting into the bill, does it have any impact on what authority we already currently have? Is it changing it? Is it making it stronger? What is it doing compared to what authority we currently have on mobility?
Well, what we currently have around mobility is constrained by county population. So we can move within a county a license. We can't move a license from one county to another county under our current authority. We can move somewhat within a county between cities. The allocation of licenses to a city is not statutory. That was done by the agency as an administrative process. But that's a pretty limited form of mobility. So there's very little opportunity under the agency's existing authority to allow this. And that's why we need that provision in the legislation so that we can do this with respect to the social equity licenses. Well, does that answer your question? Or maybe I didn't get at what you were trying to uncover here.
I guess I'm trying to say what we're requesting in the bill, agency request bill, what does it do to what authority we already have? And is that changing that authority, giving it more authority, taking away what, and I think with the comment you made of the authority we currently have, it's kind of debatable on what authority we have and what we're saying we think we don't have. So I just want to make sure we're not doing something new that's going to take away from something we currently have. And David, can you help me on this?
Yeah, we're not, and as I understand it with that piece of legislation, because it's just focused on that program there and says the nuance, it wouldn't impact licenses that we have today that we're going to start to process even before the end of this year. And Rick, I'll get you 1 second. And and I think the concern is that there's somewhat of a gray area there, that we wouldn't want the agency request legislation to diminish any authority that exists today, which I don't believe it does, but I think that's the question is, the piece of the agency request thing is a different piece than what we have today, where it says, in consultation with OFM and data and population and proportion, blah, 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 that we're not giving away anything that we hold today.
Yeah, that's correct. The legislation doesn't
that's
take
what I was
away
asking.
any
Yeah.
authority. It adds authority for social equity licenses in particular in two ways. The existing ones can move from where they're currently assigned, and the new licenses the board would be authorized to create could be created without an attachment to any particular local jurisdiction until the licensee has selected a location and they're licensed within a certain jurisdiction. Then they'd be, so it's a limited expansion of the agency's authority. I don't see any reduction anywhere else.
Rick, do you want to get in there?
Well, I hope it helps. I think you're both right. I think your question only, does it harm our present authority? No. The real difference is, for the first time, when I apply to be a cannabis licensee, I don't have to provide a location. I'll provide that location after I gain licensure. And the difference here is typically you had to give us a location so that we could track the city and county that you were in. Here, you're going to say, no, you don't have to give me a location. You can go anywhere in the state if the local will allow you into that location. And then you're locked in after that. And you have to abide by the same rules that everyone else does if you want to move from the location that you actually gain license, that you accept as your licensee base. That's the difference that we made in the proposed changes that will allow these applicants to do something that we've never allowed anyone else to do, which is find a location anywhere in the state that the locals can agree with.
But Rick, what do we do? So we had our public hearing today on the rules. We hope to approve it first meeting in October. I think we hope license that program actually starts this calendar year, maybe first thing in January, but I would put some faith in it'll happen before the legislature adjourns in 2023. So what happens to the people who are applying to the social equity program created by our rulemaking prior to that? Let's be optimistic that legislation will be approved as written. What happens to them? So that legislation's approved in best case April, and we're processing licenses in January, February, March. Will they be able to take advantage of that mobility?
That's a really good question, David. I never even considered it before. My thought would be no, that it only applies to the legislation and the new licenses that are being created. But I think it's something we got to go back and look at. It's a really good question, David.
Because I don't think our rulemaking, Justin, would allow that mobility under rule today. Correct. So the statute, as you were saying, that we're adding here, that legislation would go further than we're doing today in our own rulemaking. Is that right, correct, Justin?
Yes. I think that's right.
That's interesting.
Yes, I believe that's true. And so our legislation presently does not have an emergency clause. So if passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, it would take effect in late July.
Right.
So that's would be the time frame beginning when the existing social equity program licenses could take advantage of that mobility feature.
And what
So what happens if we put, I don't know what I'm asking, so if it's crazy, let me know. What happens if there's an emergency clause?
Then it could take effect immediately
fast.
upon signature by the governor. So that,
But it's still, Chris, is
It's
going to be
still
after
late,
we do
right.
our rulemaking, I hope.
Right.
Yeah,
You know, and
right.
is there, and I know the rulemaking is not your bag, Chris, but either Rick or Justin or someone, is there something in the, is there any mobility addition or modification in the rules?
Within the county.
That's
So-
right.
So right now we have it based on city. So our rule proposal extends that to moving anywhere in the county. The
Okay.
agency request legislation would open that plotting of the initial location up to the state.
That's right.
So one of the issues that was a great question, because I think that does bring up some nuances. So we theoretically, especially with an emergency clause, we could have people still in the application process if that were passed with an emergency clause and implemented, which could change even the dynamics of those who were issued versus still pending issuance. So that
Creating
could be
different kind of categories. And that then the difference between the rulemaking and the statute, of course, gets to what Ollie's comment about the sort of gray area is that the rule stops at mobility within the jurisdiction, within the county, out of that concern that the legislature did not intend for the LCB to have the authority to move it outside of the county. But if we had legislation that clearly granted us that, we could do it.
Yeah.
Now, I kind of agree there's some gray there, but okay. Yeah, the timing of these is interesting.
yeah, and the difference is maybe 2.5 months or so if between an emergency clause and not. So presumably if this bill were to pass and be signed by the governor, that would likely be early part of May versus late part of July. So that's the difference that we'd be looking at there.
But I don't even know, if let's say it happens in May and we're, as Justin was just saying, mid-process under our rule mandated social equity program, whether those applicants could take advantage of that legislation because of it's after the fact. I don't know.
So, and I've had so many discussions on social equity, but does it also mean when this bill passed and we get the approval to create new license, and I think my understanding is even all new license fall into social equity, that then at that point, it might make a difference. Is that a true statement that I just made?
Yes, all of the new
Yes.
all of the newly created licenses that the board would be authorized to establish under the bill would have this privilege of one-time mobility, portability.
Right, okay, right.
To find
yeah,
a local
yeah.
jurisdiction, right.
Okay, so if the ones currently now that we've gotten back, that would be outside of this.
Or at
Yeah,
least it's a question.
This is a
Yeah.
really interesting, important question. We haven't really dug into it before, but for example, let's think about, we've got the current licenses, but who's going to want to apply for a social equity license in a city that has a ban? How long might they sit there?
We've heard this, yes.
Even
Well,
if they're
what
in
all-
process.
That's what we are hearing, right?
Right.
And
So how many of the pile that we have do we really think could be located anywhere? Maybe,
so it's only about a third of them.
I was gonna say.
12 or so
Right.
of the almost 40, around 40 current licenses are in a city or county that doesn't have, maybe it's not a ban or moratorium, maybe it's a numeric limit. Some
Which is
cities have
why we're
set
going
a
through
limit.
legislation.
and they're at the limit, so that's
I would just
why
say-
that's not usable.
And all of this is why we're going to the legislature. You know, we need more. We need to take bigger steps. And so we need the legislature to help us do that.
Right.
I think the question before us and whether there's any, you know, given the timing we're all under here, any way to align rulemaking with, you know, agency intent as represented in the legislation. Rick?
No, I meant to put my thumb up to say, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Okay.
So
And I would share with the folks that when we developed Agency Request Bill 1480 on the alcohol privilege extension,
Right.
we added an emergency clause during the phase where we're talking with OFM and the governor's office about the specific draft of the bill and the content, and it came up during that phase that it made sense to add the emergency clause. So we did it subsequent to initial submittal. So what I'm suggesting to you is there might be potential for a conversation around a change to this to add an emergency clause if that's important for the board and looks like it might make a material difference on some of the licenses that are currently available.
It might. I think we're still going to have a gap. Again, I'm hoping that we're moving ahead with our social equity program under rule fast enough that we're going to have this situation where we want to get licenses on the street, but they won't be mobile and they could be a month or two later. But
yeah, and you could also have another layer of complexity insofar as we'll most likely have to open up these rules to adapt to whatever's changed in the
right.
legislation. So that may not be as quick as we would like it. Now, if the legislation goes through and it says somebody can do, you know, it's a privilege that you can do X, I think we still need to honor that before the rules may be completed.
yeah, we could allow.
Yeah, but we're still going to have to do some adjustments and rulemaking around all of those issues as well.
Okay.
But I think, and I could be wrong, but I think we were also saying under social equity and with these licenses, they have a longer time frame to get a location and get a location back to us or something.
Yes.
That might be in their favor.
That's
to take their time.
Yes. Right, because they don't have to sign a lease and do all the things they might have
Right.
at one time.
Exactly.
Yeah. There might be some who are looking for that
Right.
extra time, but I don't know.
Okay.
Dare,
All right.
dare I also ask whether anyone's interested in looking at this same issue with respect to a reference to title certificate holders?
Well, it came up today in testimony, but does the agency legislation address that? Is that why you're asking?
It does
Or
not.
doesn't, which is why you're asking.
I don't know the legal status of this thing called a title certificate. It's not
but it's in the
mentioned or
rules.
created in statute.
No.
It's a creation of administrative action by the LCB. So
I think
it's
we
kind of a
should
gray area.
Set that for another conversation because we
Right,
did
yeah.
add something in this new version of our rules that addresses in some limited form titled certificate holder. So let's put a pin in that one for now.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Ollie? On this? Okay. Thanks, Chris. I also want to just add our thanks to Colin O'Neill for getting the fiscal notes turned around and just always does a great job. He's the board's personal budget analyst. So we appreciate the work he's always doing. Now, I was glad to see that one pop up in the inbox today. So thanks, Chris. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay, moving ahead. Chandra Brady, Director of Enforcement and Education, with an update.
Good afternoon,
Hello.
Chair Postman, Board Member Garrett. Thanks for your time this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to share the great work of the enforcement education employees. So thank you very much for that. And thank you, Dustin, for running my slides. I go ahead and put this summary just here for a frame of reference. Sometimes we pull different numbers on different days than licensing does, and this is a fluid number, but this just helps us when we're looking at numbers of AVNs and hours of education to just kind of have a frame of reference going into things. Go ahead. Thank you. I wanted to share with you the number of complaints separated by industry here that we processed. I will say that I do have the numbers that Chair Postman asked for each month when I present. I managed to get my ducks in a row before my presentation this month, and I can tell you that 70% of these complaints in the month of August, the dark blue, were generated internally. And so one of the things that I would point out is you can see that everything's pretty consistent except for in the cannabis unit. And so we had a couple of things going on this month in the cannabis unit that were a little bit different. And those mainly are some pesticide things that we're taking a look at. So you can see the impacts of those industry things always in our data. And so that's what you're seeing reflected there in that increase for August. Complaints. Remember, again, this is the slide where we used to look at the percentage of complaints that were related to COVID. So I'm happy to say we're not doing that anymore, but I'm still bragging that we're not. This is a number of our complaints that were related directly to those that are identified as public safety complaints. I think that was 2 slides, Dustin, maybe. That's okay. Thank you very much. When we take a look at education and compared to violations, I always like to see this. I added a little bit of data on the left side here. You can see that I gave you the 2020 education contacts and the 2021 contacts in light blue. Dark gray shows us where we're at for 2022 year to date. And then I'm going ahead and forecasting just so that we can take a look at where it looks like that will be by the end of 22. So it looks like we're on par to match what we did last year. And as you know, we're ramping up our education program quite a bit. So we're doing some more communication with the industry and the public and our staff even. So we may even exceed that forecasted amount. And then when we look over at the right side, you can see from right to left the number of warnings done from 2020 to 2022, the NTCs, which are specifically a cannabis tool. And as you can see, year to date, that's not a forecasted amount. That's an actually completed amount. We've already used that NTC more than we did last year. So that has been a valuable tool. And then if we look at AVNs, you can see where we're at for the year on those. I can't remember the exact number, but over 95% of our AVNs are related to underage access, youth access to product. So
is the warnings, they're the far right, that's not a forecast, that's an actual number, the 642.
Those are actual numbers too. Yeah, the only place I added the forecast was education because I just wanted, sometimes when that number looks so low, I wanted us to be able to see that we are on track to do what we did last year.
And is your sense that warnings are on track?
Yeah, we are.
I can't do the math, but you know, we're in.
Yeah, we're pretty much on track to match last year.
Okay, great, thank you.
And we have to remember, one of the things that's really difficult when looking at data this year is the impacts of COVID and other industry changes and law changes that we've experienced. There's always other elements that change data. And so it's interesting to say whether we're on par, because should we be on par based on the change in our laws and on COVID restrictions and those things? So it's interesting. It's definitely a new look at data, but. And then looking again at our third quarter educational contacts, we are down. We did a lot of education in the second quarter, and we doubled down on education to get out there and be front and center and present for our retail licensees in the cannabis industry that were experiencing some violent events, to be supportive to them. So you can see that our second quarter numbers were higher, but still 4,221 educational contacts in a quarter is still a pretty good number. So when we start looking at within each unit how many education hours are being done, again, you're going to see exactly what I just told you, which is that the cannabis unit, in the face of what was going on in the industry, reprioritized their work and just spent a lot of time in the field providing education. We were able to use those compliance consultants, how they were attended. We had the examiner team available to assist with some of that, and we just really exceeded expectations in the cannabis unit for education contacts. And then of course we can start, instead of comparing that year to date, I just wanted to give you a monthly glance at that so you can see, for example, in liquor, even though they have fewer contacts for the year than we had last year in education, you can see that last month was a really strong month for them in education, so that they are making up some of that. So just a month by month breakdown of that. And then looking at the topics of education, these are pretty consistent. These all look the same. And then we always can start to see topics that are creeping up in the industry. If you look at the 5th education topic there, we're looking at new word, I guess, unauthorized pesticides as the 5th highest, most frequent topic of education. So we can always tell what the trending topics are by looking at some of these topics and what our licensees are asking about when our compliance consultant and officers are in the field. And when we start to look at breakdown of those AVNs and warnings in each industry, you'll see that you'll see liquor, the AVNs are in blue, and then the warnings are in dark gray. So, and then again, you're going to see over on the right side in cannabis, that NTC being a great tool for that area where it's not a public safety violation. So there's not necessarily warranting an AVN, and it's something a little more serious than a warning, or we've done lots of education, we've issued some warnings, and now it's time to say, okay, you need to fix this. So that NTC, if this was the intended purpose of it, it's working out very well. And when we look at topics for NTCs, you're going to see exactly what I just told you, things that are really important, but maybe not youth access, or, for example, in the liquor industry, although we don't use an NTC there, serving intoxicated patrons, etc. And then when we look at, just like I inform you every month, when we start to look at AVNs and the topics for those AVNs, you're seeing service of youth. And this month we're actually seeing some sale or service to apparently intoxicated persons. We followed up on some complaints involving over service, and so that's what you're seeing there on that 5th violation. Then we'll do the same for our warning topics. Very similar, we start to look at things that don't rise to the occasion quite yet for AVNs, but are still, it's still in the interest of public safety, right? Compliance is our goal. So we're using this warning tool to get there. And then one of the things I want to point out is that we do a great job of resolving these issues at the lowest level possible and working with our licensees. Again, these resolutions are an opportunity to get to compliance. And so we have very few of them going forward to formal hearings and very few of them going straight to formal hearings. There's a lot of work being done both on the cannabis and liquor side to resolve these through agreement with the licensee. And this goes to that alternative dispute resolution unit and the work they're doing there. So that's very impressive. And then I wanted to give you a look at this. This is a longer term shot. You can see it starts in 2016. This is one of the bits of data that I look at. And it just shows us, you can see, for those of you that have been here over the years or heard about the things that were happening in 2018 and legislative changes, you can see when we start to look at the numbers of formal hearing requests, how that has gone down.
And so, Director, then what this tells us in a snapshot is that, well, I suppose one, they're better behaved, or two, they're increasingly finding alternate avenues, whether that's compromise, settlement, informal, et cetera, correct?
Yes, it can tell us a couple of things. We'd have to look at more data to make some conclusions, but we can certainly make some assumptions based on this, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now we're going to start to look at compliance checks. This has been a hot topic lately. This specific data is out of liquor, and this does not include curbside or delivery checks. You can see that we were down a little bit to 78%, but I'm not going to jump to any conclusions there because we've kept within where we've been over the last couple of months. I will say one of the things to share with you is that we are running a pilot in enforcement right now where we are randomly selecting the places we are going for compliance checks and assigning those to the teams, as opposed to allowing the teams to choose their own areas. That's not always incredibly popular with the team, although sometimes we see that we get different results on the compliance checks because we're checking different places. So we're seeing how that goes, and that was a change that is reflected a little bit in this data, but we can't really make any conclusions because it's 1 month. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. When we start looking at delivery and curbside, you'll see that we did 12 checks. Those were all curbside this month. I don't have any, let me make sure that's correct. I want to make sure I'm giving you the correct data. Yeah, all curbside this month. And so you can see that the compliance rate did go up, but there aren't any delivery compliance checks in those numbers. So that is likely why we're seeing that rate go up. Although hopefully there's been a ton of work done on the industry side. We've talked a lot with folks, third-party folks and industry folks about this issue. So hopefully we will continue to see that number go up. And then cannabis. Cannabis gets 100% this month, but we do only have 2 checks. So I just want to point out that I'm going to give them the 100% and they should definitely celebrate. But it is 2 checks. So
Interesting.
Yeah, these are, you know, obviously we have limited staff, as you all know. Vacancies and staffing is an issue that we're all addressing. And so what you can see in our data, what we're prioritizing, and when we are prioritizing other topics, investigations, education, support of the industry, sometimes there are places where you're going to see the impacts of that adjustment. So this is one of those where that's what you're seeing. And then when we look at tobacco and vapor, they were at 84% with 81 checks this month, youth access. Start to look at premise checks. I really just share this with you so you get a good idea of, we see a lot about checks and investigations and AVNs and following up on complaints. And this is, in addition to all of that, these are the number of times when your officers are out there in the field checking in with licensees, just stopping by to answer questions, see how everything's going, just do a visual inspection and a visit. So I would say that in year to date, our cannabis team has been to 72% of our cannabis licensee locations, and liquor has been to almost 50. So just considering that they're getting out there and they're talking to our licensees, and I'm proud of that work. And then one of the other things that we saw an uptick in, because we asked for this to be happening, is when we're out there doing premise checks and we're out there contacting licensees for any reason, just checking the idea of individuals that look youthful, just being really active. I think it's another way in which we can be proactive about ensuring that we're doing everything we can to prevent youth access of restricted products. And then I like to provide you some data about some of our unseen teams that are just doing an enormous amount of work. As you can see, these folks, not just for the enforcement division, but for the entire agency, handle our criminal history records. So anytime we're doing license renewals, licensing background checks, and also in addition to this data, they did 11 employee background checks this month. So just supporting that process too. Examiner requests, CCRS is still our top item, which we knew it would continue to be for a long time as we transition to, like you said earlier today, Chair Postman, getting 100% of people logged in. Now we're transitioning to actually getting people all using and submitting in the system. It's really nice to have a great handle on who is and who isn't doing so properly. But I'm really watching that second number as we use our examiners to analyze the data we do have and support our enforcement functions. So that's exciting for me to continue to see. FDA, one of the things I will point out, it's always interesting because this is a whole other team by contract that we have out there in the tobacco, my Texas came out a little bit there, the tobacco and vapor industries. The compliance rate is always a little lower here at 77%. You remember for our compliance checks in tobacco and vapor, it was 84%. And one of the reasons that possibly is because these are randomly selected by the FDA. And so we're going to see if that's the case as we do that in our own compliance checks. It's also another 700 inspections for the quarter that are being done in Washington State. So it goes a long way toward ensuring that we are doing our best to prevent youth access. And then sharing with you, being transparent about IA, any complaints we receive about officers. We did receive one complaint during the month of August, and that was a lower level conduct complaint. We did a preliminary investigation and it was founded and it was addressed through coaching and counseling. And then hiring and, did you say something, Chair Postman?
No.
Okay, sorry. And then hiring and recruiting, of course, now we're sitting at 35 vacancies. We do have 2 more people starting in September, and that will round out our examiner team. We will be completely full there again. And then 2 people starting October 1st. I might have said October, I meant September 16th, but the second 2 people start October 1st. And one of those folks will be our a second chemist as we begin to hire to implement that legislation. So you can see that we're continuing to do a ton of training and then recruitment and hiring efforts as well. And I just wanted to share with you that enforcement education is really working closely with the DEIB coordinator. We're going to focus on some of that work at our in-service training. We did 3 lieutenant promotions last month. We completed our strategic plan and sent that over to you. We'll be presenting that at in-service as well. We're working with other limited enforcement agencies on some draft legislation to ensure we have standardized certification and training. And then our CCR, our examiner team completed a staff training video on how to access data in CCRS. So our goal to do better at education and communication internally and externally is already showing itself in results. And with that, if you have any questions for me, I'm available.
The only thing, on the examiner slide on what they were working on, number one piece was the CCRS. And I just wondered for next time, if you could dig into that a little bit and give us a sense of what are they hearing? What are those about more? just to sort of keep a handle, take the temperature of CCRS. That'd be helpful to me.
Yeah, it looked like there were like 250 of those. Did you want me to just forward them your way?
No?
I'm just teasing. I'll make sure we get a summary of what those requests are about for you.
I want you to do the hard thinking and draw me a picture.
Okay.
Rick had his hand up. Rick, go ahead.
Chandra, I love that slide I hadn't seen before on the number of formal hearings over the years.
Oh, yeah,
And,
that was new this month.
That would be great, and I'll say why in a second, but it would be great to see that as it relates to the number of violations and citations that were issued in those years, because what my guess is, it's a perfect example of how we've refocused our attention toward education and voluntary compliance, because I saw like over 100 formal hearings, I think it was 2018, and then down to like, was it 13 or something?
Yeah.
This year, and that's exactly the kind of information, because we've got people out there, that are still making complaints about our enforcement action, but that's just a great example that we've been able to, not only through education, but through the work that your folks are doing in those informals. And I mean, I'm just going to presuppose, and I shouldn't, that's because we're a little more flexible with them, that they're not taking us to a formal too, with respect to whatever the result is of whatever the supposed violation may have been. But I just wanted to draw attention to it. I think that's great to see. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, so we looked at, obviously, with legislative changes, the change in the penalty matrix. And if you lay over AVNs and education on top of that graph, you would see education increasing and AVNs decreasing. And so the numbers would do exactly that. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Brady. Appreciate all that. We will see you next time. Move now to Justin Nordhorn for a policy update.
So I won't rehash everything you heard at the board meeting this morning.
Okay, fine.
So a lot of work going on with our team, and they've accomplished a lot that we can be proud of over the last 6 months. We have a few other things going on. We're doing some more outreach efforts. We've been looking at some design work around tribal interactions as well as research, and kind of reaching out to a number of folks to get those reference points, and also with the tribal interactions, reaching out to them and saying, what would you like to see from this as we move forward? And so far the reception has been very good, really good feedback, and we'll continue to do some of that outreach and partnerships there. We've got the CDM group on the House Bill 1480 study is moving along. We did a demo last week on the dashboard. So that's the supplemental piece. We invited our partner agencies who provided some of the data so they could see how it might be displayed. So when they get questions as this goes live later in December, that they would have some foresight on that. And so we're going to be meeting with CDM tomorrow morning. Some of our internal folks identified some really good points that were needing to be relooked at on some of the graphs, especially around the license types. And so that was really good catch. When you look at them too many times, you don't always see them. So that fresh set of eyes really helped in that particular area. And then I know everybody's aware, but I felt like I should highlight we're coming to the end of our producer processor transition period with the pesticide rules. So that is that transition period for the producers and processors is ending on September 30th. So just 2 weeks out. And then we'll have the rest of the transition time for the retailers up until the end of the year. But we're getting through that particular part of the implementation of those rules that were in the process for so long. So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on that transition, and we'll be there fairly shortly. We've got, as you heard from Anita, we've got the recruitments out for the rules coordinators. So we're hopeful that we're getting good candidates that we'll be starting to screen. And then I want to also comment on the internship area, because when I saw it pop up a few weeks ago, I was thinking along with the research side that could really be a good way to augment research. And so if any division has stuff that they want to look at, and we can bring on an intern, that could actually be done anywhere in the state with our policy team as well. So I think there could be a lot of opportunities for some projects for internships, regardless of what school you're in, and we could supervise that via distance. So
That'd be cool.
yeah, I think so. So I'm really looking forward to that. So those are, pretty much the high level areas that we're looking at. The other thing that I'll mention is we've been doing some web development with Brian's team in communications. And Audrey did a great job. I got to thank her publicly here because she really picked up the ball and ran with it. We're trying to build out some more interactive feedback on our website with policy considerations and ideas. And so before it even gets to rules, how can we interact on some of these ideas that people want to explore? And so that's one of the things we're trying to establish and build out. Hopefully with the vacancies coming, we won't have too far of a setback, but really excited about trying to get that different level of engagement. So happy to answer any questions that folks have on that.
So you have recruitments out for the two policy folks and Ledge. Tribal is still, you're waiting for more feedback, or have we?
So we've developed a draft PDF that is being reviewed right now for finalizing stuff. So we built in feedback from the tribes already. We're modeling it after other successful programs in the state. So utilizing both of those strategies, I think we'll be in a good place when we start, advancing on that engagement and bringing somebody on. And another position that we haven't decided and finalized the requirements, but I think that may be another opportunity for the teleworking. So we may be able to have applicants with the strong tribal ties that don't have to live in Olympia.
Right.
So I'm hopeful for that recruitment to be able to go pretty wide.
That'd be great. Good. Okay. Any questions, Ollie? No. Okay, great. Thanks, Justin. Tony Hood, our Deputy Director, will give us a general agency update. Hello.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and Member Garrett. I'll start off by giving you an update about our Systems Modernization Project, SMP. We continue to work with the integrator, the potential integrator for Salesforce, with our workshops, which will lead to contract negotiations. We are working to make sure we come to agreement on all of the important points that need to be laid out in the statement of work. It is taking some time, but it will pay off in the end. We hope to have a contract signed within the next few weeks and have the integrator on board and working here by mid-October. Once we have that contract signed, I can present to you a more specific schedule of our work, because then we'll reach an agreement on all of those dates and timelines. It's really important that we work together with them so that we have the resources available at the same time they have their resources working on it, so that we can test and make sure that the system we're getting is what we expect and what we are paying for. So we're working on that. The next item I have is, as we all know, the governor ended the emergency orders, or will be ending them at the end of October related to the pandemic. We are in touch with state HR to see if the Healthy Washington guidelines are going to change at all. Those are what govern what we do as state employees related to COVID. And so far we haven't heard anything, but we expect in a few weeks we'll know whether any of those guidelines change. So currently, nothing in the emergency orders that ends affects our day-to-day work as state employees at LCB. In October, we will be kicking off our part of the combined fund drive. This is a statewide combined fund drive. I'll be attending the leadership breakfast tomorrow morning with Sue LeBoy. She has been a great champion of this cause. She is heading up the committee yet again this year and working with me, and we hope that can be a great success. She's already brought forward a lot of great new ideas on how to get people involved virtually in the fundraising. We have agency strategic planning set for November 2nd. We will be doing report outs regarding the progress people have made since the last time we met. And we're excited to show off the work that people have done to meet their goals. And then make adjustments on the timelines as we need to. You know, sometimes we put a timeline out there that we can't necessarily meet. And so we'll make adjustments and be realistic about our goals and what we can accomplish. As you know, social equity and SMP take a lot of our resources. And so we need to recognize that as we work on our strategic plan goals as well. And the last thing I have today is I just wanted to take a moment to thank the divisions that I consider our support divisions. These are divisions that don't necessarily make the front page, so to speak, in the news. You know, they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily in the spotlight in any way, but finance, IT, and HR are doing a great job. We have asked a lot of these divisions as we've gone through the pandemic, dealt with the mandates, dealt with recruiting problems. We have had a ton of contracts that finance helps us with for SMP and social equity. They are constantly being asked to help us with new contracts and new issues. And of course, IT not only has worked on CCRS that Jim presented about, but also SMP and all the remote working we've had to do. So again, I just wanted to give a shout out to those divisions. They are helping the rest of us do our work, even though they're more behind the scenes. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'll second all of that. All those divisions and others, but help us do our business too. So it is noticed and appreciated.
Thank you.
I think when you say not on the front page, that's a good thing. Just in case anybody's wondering, we don't need to be on the front page. So yeah, thanks for that update, Tony. And then we're to the top, Rick Garza, the director, for his comments.
Chair Postman, Board Member Garrett, I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to be brief. I'm going to go through this quickly.
Take all the time you need.
You sure? Okay. Number one, the legislative director. We're in the process of going through that process, and I wanted you to know that likely we'll hold interviews not next week, but the week after that, and wanted you to be aware of that. So when Chris, who holds the position, had both, as you're aware, the legislative director position and the tribal liaison. And you heard Justin talk a little bit about how we're breaking that out. We want to make sure that tribal liaison position is separate from the legislative director position. It was just something that we did at the time. Thank you, Justin. I asked him to reach out to the tribes. We'll also have a tribal representative on that interview panel. Once we get the position description completed, we're kind of in the final stages of that, and I want to give staff and others, including the board, a chance to look that over. But we'll be doing that we should have something final in the next few days. But I appreciate Justin reaching out to the tribes. I think we can be more holistic and comprehensive in the work that we do with our tribes. Typically, as you all know, that work that Chris was doing in addition to the legislative director was really focused mostly on these compacts that we were drawing up with the tribes with respect to cannabis. And that was important at the time. And, you know, I think the good thing is we're just about to the end of that process. There may be only one or two tribes left that might be interested in compacting with you. So my hope is, and the work that staff is doing on that position description can provide a lot more you know, partnership with the tribes around more than just cannabis. So just wanted to share that with you. Chris did a good job of updating you on the agency request bills. Just appreciate the board's concurrence with the proposed changes that we worked on quickly at the last moment. And frankly, I believe that all those changes that were made, both to the THC bill and the social equity bill, give it a better chance of being accepted by the governor, the governor's office, and the legislature. So thanks for that. There was one comment about the certificates, and I wasn't sure, but I just want to remind everyone, and I don't see licensing staff here, but The certificate is so remember they had a license if I lived in a ban or moratoria, and we converted it to a certificate because they were unable to operate due either to a ban, a moratorium, or some other factor that was out of their control. And I know there are 2 or 3 other issues, like a local zoning issue, but I just wanted everyone to think about that, which is they do hold a license, though we converted it to a certificate so they wouldn't have to continue to pay, for instance, rental costs. And Ollie, you remember the discussion that we had back then. We were trying to remove costs that they were incurring because they were having to pay for that. So we converted it to a certificate, and if ever they're able to use it, then they convert it back to a license with a location. So just wanted to clarify that. There was a little discussion about the internship program, and it really fits closely with the DEI work that we're doing. Before the pandemic, as someone said, Clarice and I were reaching out to places like Heritage College in Toppenish, which is a majority college. And there are many, Central, YVC in Eastern Washington, where I grew up, community colleges where there's huge numbers of students that come from communities of color. The idea was to create an internship program to bring them to work with us and have an opportunity they typically don't have. So I think it was David or someone had asked, is it just enforcement? I just want to share that initially, because we have such a large enforcement division, it is focused there, but it's for the entire agency. And we'll be working with Jim Weatherly and others and Anita and the entire team to do everything we can, because I think that's an opportunity to create diversity in the agency. And so I was kind of pleased to see that Jim and the PAIR team and everyone is looking at as an example. And then lastly, Kathy, I just want to recognize you, our rules coordinator. I think people were a little concerned today that, because we've got these rules on social equity before us, that there might be a lot of folks providing input, which would be great, but there was some concern there. And I'm just saying, you all do such a good job of educating people that the changes that we make through these proposed rules and the discussions that happen with people outside the organization day to day, hour to hour, before we even get to the hearing, that we didn't have a whole lot of comments today on those proposed rules. And it's just a testament to the work that Kathy and others, including all the divisions and especially licensing, do to make sure that they're always communicating with those that want information about where we are with our rules. So just a moment to recognize Kathy and her team. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman and Ollie, if you have any questions for me.
Great. Any questions? And then we'll just check for anybody we missed, anything additional any member of the team has to add. Not seeing it, nothing from the board, so there's nothing left to do but to adjourn. So we will adjourn the executive management team for September 14th and see you back here next week for a caucus meeting. Thanks, everybody.